decided to do some freezing of my butternut squash in my garden, and so what I did is I cut the squash in half, and I'm using a spoon to remove the seeds and the stringy stuff that's in the center of it. I had grown butternut squash and I had plenty of it, so freezing this I thought would help prolong the shelf life rather than just keeping the whole squash in my basement. And so I am just also using this as an opportunity to try out the squash pumpkin disc for my Roma food processor to see how well that works as well. So all I did is I tried to use a big spoon to get as many seeds out as I could, and as you can see the stringy stuff was not coming out that easily. So what I did is I took a melon baller and I scraped it down even more thoroughly. So to start out, just always make sure that you rinse your squash before you cut it in half, so that way you get any pesticides or junk off the shell of the squash before you start this process. And then I took a knife and just cut the stem part off as well. As you can see, it's kind of flat towards the left side. And then halve it, get the seeds and the stringy stuff out. As you can see, the melon baller works a lot better than the spoon did for getting the stringy stuff out. And you can use this technique for acorn squash, pumpkins, basically any kind of winter squash, you can't do it for spaghetti squash, but I think for all other varieties you can. Then I placed them into a 13 by 9 inch glass baking dish, and I put the halves cut side down. I am not roasting them, I am just baking them to make it soft for making squash puree. And then I added about a cup of water. You just want to make sure that the water covers the whole base of your baking dish and is kind of about 1/4 of an inch up the sides. And then I covered it with tin foil so that way the squash could steam and I wouldn't lose all my water in the oven. And I had the oven set at 350 degrees. Usually people put it in there for 400, but that's if you want to roast it, and I just wanted to soften it up. So 350 degrees, and then it could bake in there anywhere from 40 to 90 minutes, depending on how big your squash is. Your main concern is that you want it to be fork tender. As you can see, I can easily poke my fork into the squash. Next, I just took as soon as it had cooled down so I could handle it, I took a spoon and I just started scooping the squash into my my Roma food processor. Usually, or I should say a food mill. Usually I put this in a food processor. I don't go to this extreme measure, especially when I'm only doing a few squash. But like I said, I wanted to try it out and see how well it worked. I also found out that just scooping the squash out of the rind was very time consuming. So later we decided to just peel the squash, which was very easy after it had steam baked in the oven. And then we just cut the squash up into cubes and then just put the cubes into the food strainer so that way it was ready to go. As you can see, the food strainer's hopper holds a lot of squash, so if you're doing 20-30 squash, I think this would be more worth the effort than if you're just doing a handful. But once you have the hopper filled, you just use the plunger and you just start pushing the squash through the screen. One thing that I noticed is that the squash was very dry compared to other things that I use this food strainer for. I normally use it for apples when I make applesauce, tomatoes, tomato sauce, and you can use it with berries to make jams. All those are a lot wetter consistency, so it slides down the chute a lot easier. I was having difficulties with it, and I also didn't think it was that great that I had a lot of waste coming out of that clear filter that you could see to the left of the screen, because I thought all of it should have been going through as a puree. So I took the stuff that came out the waste and I did rerun it through the hopper, And surprisingly, when I did look at the waste stuff, it did have like some strings in there. So I guess it was doing its job. And basically all I want to do is puree. I think, like I said, it's really not that useful. You can use a food processor, but I can see myself using this for, instead of pumpkin and squash, use it for potatoes, to rice potatoes, especially if you're making potato lefse. I think that that would be a lot better use of this disc. So as I continued working, I needed to use a scraper to scrape the stuff down the chute into my Tupperware container. And after we did this, we ended up putting it in Ziploc bags, leaving a 1/2 to an inch headspace, and then just flattening it out and putting it in our freezer. And the squash was great as always. If you are interested in the food strainer that I'm using, they actually don't make Roma anymore, but I'll still leave the link below so that way you can see. I think Roma was bought out by another company. And then this is just an accessory attachment that you purchase separately. Otherwise, if you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks for watching.